The air in our house had become thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. I could feel it in every corner of our home, every glance Adam shot my way. He'd been different recently, quieter, more focused. At first, I thought it was just the pressures of work, the stress of everything piling up. But now, I could sense that something was building, something darker, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I sat on the couch, nervously twirling a strand of my hair, waiting for him to come home. I had no idea what he was planning, but the way he'd been acting, the way he'd been talking to me, it was all leading up to something. It had been a week since he first brought it up. His voice had been low, almost conspiratorial as he whispered the idea to me, and I just nodded, unsure of what to think. But here I was, sitting on our couch, heart pounding, waiting for what was about to happen. I had been with Adam for years, our relationship always deep, always intimate. We had explored things together before, shared our fantasies, talked about stepping outside the bounds of what was typical for most couples. But this felt different. This was something I had never imagined in my wildest dreams. The first time Adam mentioned it, I thought he was joking. "What if we invited some strangers over?" he had said, his voice playful, but there was something in his eyes that made me pause. "Two men. You'd enjoy it. I know you would. It could be liberating." I laughed it off, unsure if he was serious. He smiled, but there was an intensity behind his expression. "Think about it," he said. "You've always wanted to feel wanted, to feel like you're desired in ways you haven't felt before. Don't you want to explore that?" I told him I didn't know. I told him I needed time to think about it. I didn't want to admit that the thought had sparked something inside me, a small, dangerous curiosity. Adam had always known how to push my boundaries, how to awaken something in me that I didn't always understand. And I knew, deep down, that this was something that would change everything. And now, sitting alone in our living room, I realized that the time to think was over. Adam's instructions were clear. He told me to get ready, to dress in something that made me feel desirable, to prepare for what was coming. He was being so calm, so confident. But I could hear the underlying excitement in his voice, the thrill of what was about to unfold. I couldn't stop my mind from racing. The men he had arranged to come over were strangers to me. They had been handpicked by Adam. They were both in their 30s, tall, athletic, and incredibly good-looking. The idea of being with them, of being desired by them, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't know if I was ready for this. But something inside me whispered that I needed to do it. Something inside me told me that this would be the key to unlocking a part of myself I had been ignoring for far too long. The door opened, and Adam stepped inside. His eyes immediately found mine, and his smile was full of knowing. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice husky with desire. I stood up slowly, feeling the butterflies in my stomach multiply with every second that passed. I had dressed carefully, wearing something that made me feel confident, a silky black dress that clung to my curves just the right way. I had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable, yet more powerful at the same time. Adam took a step closer, his gaze lingering on me as if he could see straight through me. "You're ready, aren't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His hand reached out to gently brush my cheek, and I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. "I think so," I whispered, unsure if I meant it. "Good," he said, his smile widening. "You'll be perfect. Just remember, this is for you, for us. Trust me." His words, so simple, so full of promise, sent a shiver down my spine. And before I could say anything else, the doorbell rang. It was time. My heart raced in my chest as I walked toward the door, my legs feeling like they were made of rubber. Adam was behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder, guiding me. When I opened the door, I was met with two sets of eyes that were filled with anticipation and desire. They were everything Adam had promised, tall, confident, and more than just a little intimidating. The taller one, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward first. "Hello," he said, his voice smooth and low. "You must be the beautiful woman we've been waiting for." His eyes slid down my body, making me feel both exposed and wanted in a way I couldn't describe. The second man, shorter, but with a muscular build and dark, curly hair, gave me a small smile. "Don't be shy," he said, his voice more playful. "We're just here to make sure you enjoy yourself." I didn't know how to respond. My breath was shallow, my mind spinning as I glanced at Adam. His smile was all confidence, all control. He had planned this. He was in charge of this moment. And I was standing here, caught between desire and fear, uncertain of what was about to happen, but unable to stop it. Adam stepped forward, wrapping his arms around me. "Don't worry," he whispered in my ear. "You're not alone in this. We're in this together. Just let go and trust me." And just like that, I felt my walls start to crumble. It wasn't just about the men or the fantasy. It was about the trust between Adam and me, about the bond we had built. And as the first man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine, I realized that this was more than just physical. This was about us, about exploring the depths of our relationship in ways we had never dared before. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the heat of their gazes on me. When I opened them again, Adam's eyes met mine, full of understanding. He was giving me permission, giving me freedom, and I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't just doing this for him. I was doing this for me too. The moment they stepped inside, the room felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, charged with something both unfamiliar and electrifying. The tension was palpable, and as they closed the door behind them, the world outside seemed to fade away. I stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. My heart was pounding, my body on edge, and yet, part of me couldn't look away. I was already too far gone. Adam stepped behind me, his presence like a steadying force, his hand grazing my back, sending shivers down my spine. "Remember," he whispered in my ear, his voice full of confidence, "this is about us. About what we can explore together. Don't hold back." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could believe him. I wasn't sure I even knew who I was anymore, standing here, surrounded by strangers who seemed to want me in ways I couldn't comprehend. But as I glanced at Adam, his reassuring smile, the look in his eyes, it calmed me, even as a wave of anxiety rolled through me. The men moved closer, one of them gently taking my hand, his touch sending a shock through me. I couldn't decide if I wanted to pull away or lean into it. He smiled, his eyes dark with desire. "You're even more beautiful than we imagined," he murmured, his voice like velvet. I felt a rush of heat at the compliment, but it felt strange too. My body was responding in ways I didn't expect, and yet my mind kept racing. I hadn't prepared myself for this, for the reality of what Adam had set in motion. But here I was, standing between two strangers, my heart in my throat, trying to understand what this meant for me, for us. Adam's voice broke the silence. "You're doing great," he said, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Just let go and trust me. Let us give you something you've never had before." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to focus on the moment, trying to push aside the voice of doubt that kept screaming in my head. This was supposed to be about trust, about exploring together. But the fear was there, undeniable. The thrill and the terror of it all tangled together, and I couldn't separate the two. The first man, the one with piercing blue eyes, stepped forward, brushing his fingers along my arm. His touch was soft but insistent, pulling me into him, and before I knew it, I was kissing him. The sensation was immediate, overwhelming. His lips were firm but gentle, his hands tracing the curve of my body as if he had known me forever. It felt wrong and yet right all at once. My body moved on instinct, responding to the touch, the heat of him against me. I could feel Adam's presence behind me, watching, guiding me. I could feel the intensity of his gaze, the control he had over this moment. The sensation was surreal. My mind was clouded with conflicting thoughts, guilt, shame, but also a hunger for something I couldn't quite name. The second man stepped forward, his hands resting lightly on my hips, his touch almost reverent. The intensity of it all built up slowly, and before I knew it, the room was spinning, the boundaries of right and wrong blurring into a haze of sensation. The power dynamic between us shifted, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, desired, wanted, alive. As the evening wore on, The lines between us and them, between what was real and what was fantasy, continued to blur. It was as if I was watching myself from the outside, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. Adam was there, guiding me, his words laced with satisfaction, but there was a part of me that felt hollow, empty, as if the physical sensations weren't enough to fill the void that had existed long before this night. When it was over, when the strangers had left and the door clicked shut behind them, the silence in the room felt deafening. My body was exhausted, tingling with sensations that didn't seem to belong to me. Adam stood in front of me, his eyes alight with pride, as if he had just won a victory. And in some way, maybe he had. But the emptiness inside me only seemed to grow. "You did so well," Adam said, his voice warm with praise. He stepped forward, pulling me into his arms. But as I leaned into him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The intimacy that had once been so pure, so real, now felt distant, like a thread that had been pulled too tight and was about to snap. "I don't know if I can do this again," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The words came out before I could stop them, and the weight of them seemed to hang in the air between us. Adam's grip tightened slightly, his lips brushing the top of my head. "It's okay," he said, his voice low and soothing. "We don't have to do it again. But you'll never forget this, will you?" I shook my head slowly, a mix of regret and something else, something I couldn't name, washing over me. I had given into something I didn't fully understand, something that had seemed like it would fill the emptiness inside me. But now, as I stood there in Adam's arms, I realized that the emptiness wasn't gone. It was just different. The desire, the thrill of the moment, was still lingering in my veins, but the aftermath, the hollow feeling of what we had just shared, the distance that had grown between us, left me questioning everything. Was it worth it? Had I lost a part of myself in this? And what did it mean for our future? I didn't have the answers, not yet. But I knew that what had just happened was more than just a physical encounter. It had changed something deep within me, within us. I could feel the shift, feel the crack in the foundation of our relationship. The room was quiet now, the noise of our desires fading into the background, replaced by the silence that felt more deafening than anything that had come before. I didn't know where we would go from here. I didn't know if we could go back to what we once had. But I knew one thing for sure, everything had changed. And I couldn't undo it,